I think about, what lives must have been like. I yearn to understand what they would have lived through. Not that I wanted to be in their shoes necessarily, but I'm very, very interested in how their lives unfolded and what put them in particular places at certain times and how difficult it must have been to be there on some days. But then to be able to find one another with Charles and Mariah Syphax having gotten married and the love that they must have had for each other, what it must have been like to have a family that they could raise and become free and think that they're going to do better or more than what they've were able to accomplish themselves.
All of the families that were here were not here by choice on any level. And as soon as anyone had an opportunity to resist, leave, they did.
We know that they had to be very strong individuals because of the work that they did. Uh, to know that you work from sunup to sundown, and then you're also working to take care of your children, it takes a lot to be able to do that. A lot of fortitude to work in a field and still come home and take care of your children and family. One thing that gives me some comfort is that they were able to stay together as a family. When they were freed, they were still together. The children were still with them. Some others who were enslaved, sometimes they were split up because you couldn't control your life because that slave owner could sell you at any time or to move you someplace else, and your family would be split up.
It wasn't pleasant. You don't have your freedom. But on the flip side of it, you got the Potomac River right there. And, I'm sure some of the nights were beautiful nights where you got a beautiful breeze blowing off. You're in tight quarters, but you're still with family.
When I'm doing this project and when I'm doing this interview and when I'm talking to people, I stress that we are not talking about slaves. That is a term that is used by those who are in power and basically have dictated the framework. These were people, these were humans, first of all, and they were enslaved. They were captive. They were in bondage. And Martha Washington and George Washington were people who held others in bondage.
My Caroline was real. She was a real person. That whatever her fate was there, whatever her daily journey was there, that she was flesh and blood. She could suffer disappointments. She could she could have hurts. She could feel slighted. She could feel joy and happiness. But whatever was happening there, it affected her.
We make it very clear that George Washington, as a slaveholder, has to be held accountable for his misdeeds and his actions as far as holding people in bondage and servitude. But at the same time, we have to put it in perspective because we realize that he was a man of his time and a man in this country, and that slavery was part of a national institution of everyday life in where we are in Virginia.
As I've learned more about his views on slavery and the struggles that he had with it, but yet didn't do a whole lot to try to change the lives of the people that were enslaved here, it's left me frustrated with, why couldn't we do more sooner? And the decisions that were made by the first president of the United States and the example that he was setting for others in terms of what it meant to be a landholder and a slaveholder and managing people as assets versus trying to help people succeed.
Does it take away from his greatness? No, but it certainly did facilitate it. Because if he hadn't had those people there, he wouldn't have been able to have left so quickly and come back, So, yeah, he had a lot of ease because of them.
Even though we hold him accountable, we also recognize that there was a benevolent side, and we recognize that too. So he could be the father of our country, the president, because he knew that those people who were here, whether they wanted to be here or not, whether they were voluntary or involuntary, they had a responsibility and they knew what it was, and they went ahead and discharged it.
We helped build this place and make it what it is. We helped make the president who he was. I mean, we might not have had voting power and all that back then, but we made that man, we made George Washington, or added to or contributed to him being the prominent person that he is today. It may never get said, but when a man writes in his journal that he taught Edie to plow, she was growing food that was eventually going to be on his plate. And so that was important. And you don't have to be in the limelight to be important. You can be in the background.
The people, as he called them, were witnesses. They were witnesses to the freeing of this country from Great Britain. And yet, they were not free. And I've often wondered what they thought as they overheard dinner conversations, and had to just take it all in and hear them discussing, the vocabulary of freedom, the essence of freedom.
In his will, from what I understand, after his passing, and then after Martha's passing, that the enslaved community that were his, not from Martha's endowment, but were his, that they would be released, freed. That's important.
I just think it's important to be able to portray the good and the bad of slavery, what's come out of it, what it did in terms of forging our mentality and our lives forward, and be able to show the successful things that happened since as well. That the story didn't stop here. That folks, despite their challenges and backgrounds and being enslaved, were able to become successful and productive citizens. That they didn't forget what they went through, but they didn't allow it to stop them from becoming the best people they could.
We know that these folks were resilient folks to have lived through slavery and come out and experienced freedom. Not being able to read and write, but to be able to accomplish things, to have homes, to buy property, and to go ahead with their families and move their families forward. I don't know a lot about what Dick and Charity were able to do when they were freed. I know that William Jasper, their grandson, was able to purchase 13 acres of land in 1860 after he was freed, and he and his wife deeded a half acre of that land to establish a school for African Americans in the Franconia area. So to me, it seems like they were moving in an upward direction.
My family is one of the oldest traceable African American families in the United States, and I tell you, growing up, it's something that has always been talked about within my family, to make sure that the youth, knew exactly what was going on. So the passing of the torch, if you will, and I've done so with my children as well. I have 4 kids, and so I make sure that they understand, the significance of the Quander name.
And we are very proud of the fact, but we're very quick to say that we are not the only ones by any means, don't claim to be, but we know we have a proud legacy that we are obligated to uphold and to share. And we want to be role models in as best as we possibly can be. And myself, I try to serve in that capacity as the founder and president of the Quandary Historical Society. I go anywhere, anytime to speak to anybody, but I always tell them it's not what we have done, it's what you can do the same. It's always a lift as you climb. It's always take those stumbling blocks and turn them into stepping stones. So that's the philosophy.
One of the things that was interesting to me was that Dick and his son Morris came back to Mount Vernon in 1835 to work on George Washington's tomb. And you have to wonder, having been enslaved here at Mount Vernon and being freed and going off and building a life outside in freedom, what made them come back? He would have been in his 80s when he came back. So why did he come back? And what does that say?
I had a relative, Gladys Quander Tansel, who was the first Black interpreter here on the estate. And she was hired, I want to say, in 1975, I believe. And so the ladies here, they brought Gladys in, and she did the VIP tours. And as I said, she was the only Black interpreter doing these tours. So she was here for quite some time and got to know quite a few people. And from my understanding, a lot of guests would come back to visit and would ask for her to do their tours because she did such a nice job. And I don't think she bit her tongue, I'll say that. So she told it the way it was.
When you're walking in different areas of Fairfax County, you know that these are areas where enslaved people traveled across or worked in the fields. So all over the county, it's for me, it's the same feeling that these are people, these are ancestors, these are relatives that are related to me. And they travel these paths, they walk this ground, just like I'm doing today.
Then we'd come to Mount Vernon, and then we'd walk up, huff and puff up that steep walk. I was only 12 or 13, so I got used to it. But I would come here to Mount Vernon all the time. But being that young, I did not know yet the family history and connection to Mount Vernon, although family would always say, we're historic, we got some history. But at 12, 13, 14 years old, I didn't care about that. I don't think I even asked. So as time went on and my perspective changed, then I began to see it differently. I realized that I was paying respect to Quandary ancestors among many others, and I didn't even know it. So to me, it was just a place to visit.
We stayed most of the morning and then finally had an opportunity to walk out and walk around a little bit. And I had to kind of pause and kind of just look toward the river a little bit. It hit me that now I'm standing on ground that my ancestors walked around on and worked on and farmed on and had kids on and families. And so it kind of hit home that I was able to tie our current family to the slaves that were here.
I feel right at home. And it's an interesting feeling. But I'm proud to be a descendant of Caroline. Proud that I'm here and able to tell her story. So when you walk where she walked, it's a very strange feeling. Because I feel as if, these were the great men of America. But they were known to her on a daily basis, people she saw as they would come through. And I'm wondering how she felt just taking it all in. Did she realize the gift? People are going to say the gift. Well, yes, the gift of being in a place where she saw the great men of America? And did she recognize that she too was a great person?
The Syphaxes and other African American families have had a huge impact on this country. Aside from the fact that they were treated so miserably, they have gone on to really make a difference. They were the backbone of this country for how many decades in terms of the work that they did to make plantations and the machinery and the mechanisms of this country successful. Without the thousands of African Americans that were enslaved in this country, it would not be the same.
When my aunt went, and then I found out who owned Tudor Place, that it was the step granddaughter of George Washington and the granddaughter of Martha. I was sort of taken back, and I just made a leap of faith and called out to Mount Vernon and asked who was handling the history and connected with Mary Thompson. I introduced myself, sort of gave her some background, but I could not say for 5 minutes at least that I was inquiring about a family member, because I kept saying I should tell her slave, and I couldn't say it. I mean, I just could not give that term to my relative. I thought it was such an insult. And finally I must have said, well, she's black and she worked, and by this time I think Mary Thompson knew who I was talking about, because she says, oh, you're related to Sal Twine, and we have her in the will, the 1799 will of George Washington, and we have her identified as the wife of a gardener, George. And I just cried. I just cried, because to never have known about this woman, that our life, in terms of our own history, didn't go any further back than my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother. And yet, now that I'm doing this research, my history goes back to 1712 as in documents.
On the one hand, it's exhilarating because you're connected to the earliest parts of this country when it was established. On the other hand, it's frustrating to know how people were treated and how things kind of occurred with people, how their lives were changed and impacted, and in many ways pretty negatively when you look at both sides of the family. I am very excited about trying to learn more about these ancestors. I think that they are owed a lot of gratitude for what they've done, not only for our family, but also what they've done for the country. They've gone on to do some tremendous things that we haven't talked about here, but it really makes me proud to be a part of this legacy of people that have come from, the forebears of this country.
I know that they are speaking again. Those voices were unsung up until 1799, and we don't have any pictures or voice recordings of what they had to say. But they have reached out beyond the grave and said to each of us, we're depending upon you. You have to do this for us.